Hello, everyone. It's good to be here with you virtually, and I want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share with you information about the health effects of soy foods. And I want to thank Julie for that kind introduction. Now, as you can see, the title of my presentation is The Health Effects of Soy, a reference guide for health professionals. And that's actually the title of a recent paper that I co-authored. And I suggest that if you want very detailed information about soy, that you consider downloading this paper. It's open access, so everyone has the opportunity to read it. In addition to containing lots of background information about soy, we cover 16 specific topics. And for each topic, there's a 400 to 500 word literature summary. And then each of those summaries is followed by a short perspective or conclusion. Now, before touching upon some of those topics, I want to mention that in the recent issue of the dietary guidelines, that soy receives several prominent mentions. You can see in the dairy group, we have fortified soy beverages and yogurt. In the protein foods group, we have tofu, tempeh, the traditional soy foods, also products made from soy flour, isolate, and concentrate. In the vegetable subgroup, we have edamame and soybeans. And then finally, in the oils group, we have soybean oil and vegetable oil. Now, in the United States, soybean oil is actually marketed as vegetable oil. Okay, let's take a look at protein quality. That's always an important consideration. The method for determining the quality of a protein that's accepted by the FAO and most regulatory bodies around the world, including the United States, is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. This method simply takes into consideration how well the protein is digested and the amino acid content or profile of the protein. Now, the highest score using this method is 1 or 100%. That's the score that soy protein receives. It's also the score that egg whites and milk receives. But you can see that soy protein actually has a higher score than beef and a much higher score than the other plant proteins listed on this slide. So it's a very high quality protein. Now, recently, the FAO recommended moving away from that somewhat older method to a newer method called the digestible indispensable amino acid score. There are several differences between the newer method and the older method. I don't have time to discuss these, but I do want to mention one difference, and that is with the newer method, you can actually have scores above 100% or above 1. So how does soy fare using this new system, this new method? Well, quite well. The Impossible Burger, which is a plant burger made mostly with soy, receives a score of 107%, tofu 97%, soy milk 117%. So those scores are quite comparable to what we see for lean ground beef, 110%. And all of those scores are much greater than the score for the Beyond Burger, which is a plant burger made with pea protein, has a score of only 83%. Now, in addition to being a very high quality protein, soy protein also directly lowers blood cholesterol levels. We've actually known this for about 50 years. And we're talking about a direct effect of the protein. Now, soy foods also tend to be high in polyunsaturated fat. And when polyunsaturated fat replaces saturated fat in the diet, blood cholesterol levels are reduced. So that's a second mechanism by which soy can lower cholesterol levels. But here we're talking about the effect of the protein. In recognition of the cholesterol lowering effects of soy protein, in 1999, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved a health claim for soy foods and coronary heart disease. The claim reads 25 grams of soy protein per day as part of a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce risk of heart disease. Here we have a summary of the results of meta-analysis of clinical studies that have evaluated the cholesterol-lowering effects of soy protein. So in the first column, you have the author, second column, the number of studies in the analysis, the third column, the number of participants in those studies, and then the fourth column, you have the average reduction in LDL cholesterol. It's a modest effect ranging from about 3% to as much as 6%. But even though it's relatively modest, it's still quite relevant from a public health perspective. And I say that because, as you can see on the next slide, because you can see here that for every 1% reduction in LDL cholesterol, there is about a 2% reduction in risk of coronary heart disease. So even a 4 or 5% reduction in LDL cholesterol can reduce your risk of heart disease by about 10%. Another issue that has been heavily researched is how soy protein compares to other proteins as a source of protein for building muscle in response to resistance exercise. Well, if you go through the scientific literature, what you see is whey protein is also often identified as the optimal protein for building muscle. Whey represents 20% of the protein in milk, cow's milk, casein, the other 80%. But this literature is very outdated. And I say that because a recent meta-analysis found that soy protein supplementation leads to similar gains in muscle mass and strength in response to resistance exercise training as whey and animal protein supplementation. So soy protein does as well as whey protein and animal protein for those folks who are engaged in exercises like weightlifting. This meta-analysis included 9 studies. They ranged in duration from 6 to 36 weeks. 5 studies compared soy with whey, and 4 studies compared soy with beef or dairy or milk protein. And finally, soy protein is very efficiently produced. And this is one attribute of soy protein that probably doesn't receive enough attention, but it's an important one. And I say that because consumers are increasingly considering the impact of their diet on the environment when making their food purchasing decisions. Now, here we have an excellent paper from Gonzalez and colleagues published about a decade ago. And what you see is that of the 28 animal and plant protein sources that were evaluated, it was determined that soybeans are the most efficient way to produce protein. They're not only efficiently produced, but greenhouse gas emissions from soybeans are much lower than from these other protein sources. So in summary, soy protein, really high quality, lowers blood cholesterol levels, promotes gains in muscle mass and strength, and is sustainably produced, very environmentally friendly. Now let's talk about the role that soy may have in reducing risk of chronic disease, specifically in preventing breast cancer. And breast cancer is one of the leading cancers around the world, and you can see among Mexican women, the mortality rate for breast cancer was actually higher than for all of the other cancers. And these data are from year 2013. Well, I do believe that soy reduces risk of breast cancer, but in my opinion, in order for soy to exert this benefit, it needs to be consumed early in life, that is during childhood and or during the teenage years. This hypothesis was first proposed in 1995. There are animal data in support of it. Uh, we also have observational data or epidemiologic data, and we have a pretty good understanding of why when you consume soy early in life, it reduces breast cancer risk later on in life. Now, I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into specifically why soy can have this very protective effect, but because of the data, I do recommend that all girls consume at least one serving of soy per day. The studies suggest one serving is enough to reduce risk. And it's easy to incorporate one serving into the diet. That's an ounce of soy nuts, a cup of soy milk, a half a cup of tofu. It's a nutritious food. There's no disadvantage to eating soy, and it may have a profound effect on breast cancer risk. Well, why would soy reduce breast cancer risk? I think all the evidence suggests that soy reduces breast cancer risk because soy foods and soybeans are uniquely rich sources of isoflavones. And you can see just how unique soybeans are with respect to their isoflavone content because in Japan, where soy foods are commonly consumed, isoflavone intake is 30 to 40 milligrams per day, whereas in the United Kingdom and the US and Europe, it's only 3 or 4 or 5 milligrams per day. So soy foods are really quite unique. One serving of a traditional soy food contains about 25 milligrams of isoflavones, and you can come up with a pretty decent estimate of the isoflavone content of a traditional soy food if you know the amount of protein it provides, because there are 3 to 4 milligrams of isoflavones per gram of protein. Now, in the more concentrated sources of soy protein, like soy protein isolate or concentrate, typically the isoflavone level is much lower. So what are isoflavones? Well, isoflavones are naturally occurring plant compounds. They have a similar chemical structure to estrogen, one of the reproductive hormones. So for that reason, they're able to bind to estrogen receptors on cells and do in fact exert some estrogen-like effects. Consequently, they're commonly classified as plant estrogens or phytoestrogens. However, despite their classification as phytoestrogens, they're very different from the hormone estrogen. Sometimes they actually have effects opposite to those of estrogen, and many times they have no effects in tissues that are affected by estrogen. So isoflavones and estrogen are very different molecules. Isoflavones have been proposed to exert a number of health benefits. For example, they may reduce wrinkles, improve the health of the arteries, reduce hot flushes or hot flashes in menopausal women, improve memory, and reduce the risk of breast and prostate cancer. Now, we've already talked about breast cancer, and we don't really have time to discuss these other benefits with the exception of skin health. So I'm just going to focus on some of the studies showing that soy reduces wrinkles. Now, if you're an older person like I am, you're well aware that skin wrinkling is a natural phenomenon due to a variety of degenerative, environmental, genetic, and hormonal influences. There's actually been quite a bit of research focused on the effects of soy on skin health. Some of these studies have intervened with soy foods, some soy protein, and some with isoflavone supplements in pill form. The evidence is quite impressive. You can see that of the 8 studies, 5 showed a reduction in wrinkles. 1 showed an increase in collagen synthesis. Collagen is the protein in the skin that gives it structure. 1 showed an increase in hydration. Hydration tends to decrease with age. And the last one, a Japanese study, found an increase in the overall health of the skin. So these data are quite impressive, but because each of these studies had design limitations, the evidence doesn't allow for a definitive conclusion to be made. Nevertheless, the evidence is sufficiently encouraging such that the Soy Nutrition Institute Global, the organization for which I work, in combination with the United Soybean Board, has funded a 2-year project looking at the effects of soy on skin health. This is a study involving postmenopausal women. For 6 months, the women will consume either soy protein that contains isoflavones or casein, which is milk protein. And then the main outcomes are the wrinkle depth collagen, and pigmentation. I'm very excited about this study because I think we're going to see a real prominent reduction in wrinkles, but we're not going to know for about another year. Now let's finish up by looking at some myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings about soy. The first one is the notion that soy causes feminization, male feminization. This is one that I'm personally and professionally interested in because I eat soy on a daily basis. So the question is, does soy or isoflavones lower testosterone levels or does it raise estrogen levels? And you have to look at estrogen, even though you think of estrogen in association with women, older men actually make more estrogen than older women do. Well, the clinical evidence is quite clear. Here we have a meta-analysis of 41 clinical studies. No effects on testosterone levels, no effects on estrogen levels. And this meta-analysis included almost 2,000 men. What about gynecomastia? This is a breast enlargement or swelling in men. This could be a condition that's actually quite common and can be caused by exposure to estrogen-like substances. Well, again, clinical evidence is quite clear. Wonderful study, 3 years in duration, really long for a nutrition study. 100 milligrams of isoflavones were consumed by one group versus a placebo. 100 milligrams is a huge amount of isoflavones, about 4 servings of soy. And there were almost 300 men. So that's a large study. No effect on tenderness, swelling, enlargement. No evidence of gynecomastia. Finally, sperm and semen. Again, questions have been raised that soy may actually impair fertility. That's not the case because here we have 3 clinical studies that evaluated soy and isoflavones on sperm and semen parameters. None of them found any adverse effects. Now, interestingly, even though there's research showing that if you consume soy when you're young, it reduces the risk of breast cancer later on in life, concerns have been raised that because soy contains isoflavones, it may worsen the prognosis of breast cancer patients, women with breast cancer. This concern was first raised in the late 1990s as a result of findings from animal studies. But the clinical evidence is quite supportive of safety, very clear. 11 studies have looked at the effects of soy on the density of the breast, and 6 studies have actually taken a biopsy of the breast before and after exposure to soy or isoflavones. No effects on breast tissue density, no effects on breast cell proliferation. These are markers or indicators of breast cancer risk, and you're seeing no adverse effects. And what I'm going to say now is not surprising, but all of these organizations have concluded that soy foods are safe for breast cancer patients or that isoflavones don't adversely affect breast tissue. So you have organizations around the world concluding that soy is safe. You have the American Cancer Society, the Canadian Cancer Society, the Irish Society of Medical Oncology, the World Cancer Research Fund, European Food Safety Authority, German Research Foundation, the Cancer Nutrition Consortium. Lots of organizations have concluded that soy is safe for breast cancer patients. In fact, a recent paper by the American Cancer Society concluded that consuming soy after a diagnosis of breast cancer may reduce recurrence, may decrease the likelihood that a breast cancer patient will experience a second breast cancer. So in many respects, we've gone from a situation where in the 1990s, animal studies suggested that soy could be harmful to women with breast cancer to the situation today where human research suggests breast cancer patients may benefit from consuming soy. Soy and thyroid function. You can Google this. You'll see a lot of scary messages about soy impairing thyroid function. That's just not the case. Here we have the results of a meta-analysis of 18 clinical studies. The analysis found no statistically significant effects on the two main thyroid hormones, thyroxine, T4, and triiodothyronine, T3. And then finally, there's a concern that soy or isoflavones may actually be endocrine disruptors. That's an exogenous substance or mixture that alters the functions of the hormonal system and consequently causes adverse health effects. Now, normally, when a compound is classified as an endocrine disruptor, it's done so based on the results of animal studies. Now, fortunately, in the case of soy, we literally have hundreds of clinical and observational studies that can be used to determine whether soy is an endocrine disruptor. And what we find that it absolutely is not. Here we have a paper published last year that included 10 authors. I was one of the authors, 30,000 words, 700 references, observational and clinical studies, so the human research covering a broad range of health outcomes, indicate that neither soy foods nor isoflavones warrant classification as endocrine disruptors. This study looked at just about everything: thyroid function, feminization, hormones in men and women, children, hormones levels in children, puberty onset, in utero effects, clear bill of health. Finally, soy protein, like many foods, can cause an allergic reaction. And in fact, in the United States, soy is one of the big eight. These are the 8 foods that are thought to be responsible for 90% of the food allergic reactions among Americans. But what's often not appreciated is that the prevalence of these different 8 allergens differs markedly. And in a paper published 2 years ago, it shows that among the 8 allergens, soy protein allergy is the prevalence of soy protein allergy is absolutely the lowest. Only about 3 adults out of every 1,000 are allergic to soy. Most children outgrow their soy allergy by age 10. And by the way, if you are sensitive to soy protein, if you experience an allergic reaction, which is rare, but it does happen, you can still consume highly refined soybean oil. I want again to thank the organizers and thank you for your attention. I hope you have some questions, and if you're not able to ask them following this presentation, please do email me. Again, thank you very much.